Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale brings us closer to the heart of what truly matters. Today, we have a remarkable story about the power of overlooked potential, the quiet genius hiding in plain sight, and the life-changing impact of one unexpected decision. It's a journey that starts with a janitor, a man who's never been given a seat at the table, until one woman sees something in him that no one else does. Join us as we explore the lessons learned from his rise and the profound changes he brought to a company. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. It was a typical day at Harrington Enterprises, or so I thought. The boardroom was filled with the usual buzz of anticipation, the kind of energy that makes you sit a little straighter, exchange nervous glances, and whisper under your breath. Today's meeting was critical. Financial decisions were on the table. Decisions that could shape the company's future. And everyone knew it. The executives were dressed in their usual sharp suits, ties perfectly knotted, their eyes glinting with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of climbing the corporate ladder. They were used to making tough calls, dealing with shareholders, and managing high-stakes situations. But none of them, not a single one, was prepared for what happened next. The door to the boardroom opened, and Emily Harrington walked in. She was the CEO, the woman who ran this company with the same precision as a surgeon wielding a scalpel. The kind of woman whose mere presence commanded attention. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor, each step a testament to her confidence and authority. But it wasn't her presence that left the room silent. No, it was the man who was walking beside her. Daniel. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit like the rest of us. He wasn't holding a leather briefcase or adjusting a fancy watch. In fact, he didn't even have a business card in his pocket. Instead, he wore a dark blue janitor's jumpsuit, the kind we all saw around the building but rarely thought about. His hands were clasped tightly around a cleaning rag, and he looked out of place. I could see the confusion written on everyone's face, but no one dared to say a word. The executives exchanged baffled glances, their eyes darting around the room. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly unsure if they had just witnessed an elaborate prank or if something more serious was about to unfold. Lawrence, the CFO, cleared his throat and forced a smile. Mrs. Harrington, I wasn't expecting. Emily raised her hand, silencing him before he could embarrass himself further. I invited him, she said, her voice calm, but there was something in her tone that made it clear this was not up for debate. Daniel looked down, clearly uncomfortable. His shoulders were stiff, and his eyes avoided the gaze of the executives. He looked like a man who had suddenly found himself in a world that didn't belong to him. A world of wealth, power, and prestige. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this room, not with these people, and yet, here he was. The silence in the room was thick, heavy. It felt like we were all holding our breath, waiting for an explanation, for some kind of context to make sense of this bizarre situation. This was supposed to be a meeting about numbers, profits, losses, market trends. It was supposed to be a conversation that happened behind closed doors with people who understood finance. People who wore suits and made deals over expensive dinners. But this wasn't a dinner meeting. And Daniel wasn't just a man with a rag in his hand. Emily sat down at the head of the long, polished glass table. She tilted her head slightly, almost as if she was enjoying the discomfort of the room. Then, after what felt like an eternity of awkward silence, she spoke. I know what you're all thinking, she said, her voice steady, and I don't care. There it was, the unspoken truth. We were all thinking the same thing. What is he doing here? But none of us were prepared for what came next. Daniel, this janitor, this man who had been invisible to most of us, was about to do something that would make us question everything we thought we knew about talent, intelligence, and potential. He wasn't just here to sweep the floors. He was here because Emily saw something in him that no one else did. Emily leaned forward slightly, her fingers laced together on the table. She glanced around the room, as if weighing the reactions of each person. I'm sure some of you are wondering why I asked Daniel to be here today, she said, her eyes locking with ours. Well, let me tell you a story. And that's when everything changed. She told us about a few weeks ago when she was walking past the staff break room on the 6th floor. a floor she almost never visited. She was on her way to another meeting when she overheard something unusual. It wasn't small talk. It wasn't someone complaining about work. No, this was different. It was a discussion about investment strategies. The kind of conversation you expect from financial advisors. Not janitors. Curious, Emily stayed behind to listen. Daniel, sitting at the lunch table with another janitor, was explaining complex financial concepts with a clarity that struck her. He spoke about market cycles, investment trends, and the undervalued stocks that had the potential for high returns. He didn't use the jargon that most people in the financial world throw around to impress clients. No, he made it simple. He made it practical. And that was when Emily made her decision. She had to invite him to the meeting. She had to see what he knew, what he could offer, because there was something about Daniel that suggested he understood business in a way that no one else in that room did. As she finished telling us the story, the room fell into an uneasy silence. I could see the shock on the executives' faces. None of us had expected this. Daniel wasn't supposed to be the one who had the answers. He was just the janitor. But there was a glint in Emily's eye. A quiet confidence that told us all this wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. And Daniel? He was about to change everything. The room remained still as Emily finished speaking. The atmosphere had shifted. What was once a meeting about numbers and corporate strategy had now become a fascinating puzzle, one that no one quite knew how to solve. Daniel, the janitor, had no formal education in finance. He hadn't worked in an office building like this for long. He wasn't supposed to be a player in a room full of corporate titans. And yet, somehow, here he was, invited into the very heart of our company. I looked at Daniel. He seemed almost invisible, despite his unexpected presence. His hands, still clutching the cleaning rag, were slightly trembling, as though he hadn't quite caught up with what was happening. His face was unreadable, expression neutral, though his eyes darted between Emily and the others, unsure of what was expected of him. I could sense his discomfort. But there was something else, too, a quiet determination, like a man who had been waiting for this moment his whole life. Even if he didn't realize it until now. Emily's eyes softened as she turned to him. Daniel, would you like to share some of your insights with us? She asked. Her voice calm and warm, as if they were having a casual conversation over coffee rather than in a high-stakes corporate boardroom. Daniel hesitated, his lips pressed together as though he was weighing every word. He cleared his throat, and then, in a voice that barely seemed to fill the room, he began. I don't really know much about the stock market, he said slowly, looking at his feet. But what I do know is that sometimes the best investment isn't about the numbers. It's about understanding people. It's about knowing what they're afraid of and what they want. His words hung in the air. And for a moment, the executives looked at each other as if unsure how to respond. This was not what they were expecting. They wanted spreadsheets, projections, hard data. But Daniel, the janitor, was speaking in a language that was almost foreign to them, a language of human instinct, emotion, and intuition. Emily nodded, her eyes lighting up. Exactly, she said, leaning forward. And that's what's been missing in our strategy. The human element. At this point, I couldn't help but be intrigued. I had spent most of my life in the corporate world, surrounded by people who were driven by metrics, goals, and quarterly earnings. Everything was about numbers and systems. It was all so structured, so predictable. But Daniel wasn't following any of those rules. He was speaking from a place of empathy, of understanding that goes beyond graphs and formulas. He was talking about people, the very thing that our company had been losing sight of for years. Daniel continued, growing more comfortable as he spoke. I've been cleaning these floors for years, he said, his voice gaining strength. I've seen the way people act when they think no one's watching. They talk about what they really care about, what's bothering them, what they need, and sometimes, you learn more from what people don't say than what they do. As he spoke, I found myself nodding along. There was truth in what he was saying, something I hadn't fully realized until now. The company was so focused on profits and productivity that we had forgotten to look at the bigger picture. We had forgotten that the true value of any business wasn't just in its financials, but in the people it served, the employees. the customers, and the communities it impacted. The room had fallen into a hushed silence. And for the first time that day, the executives were listening. They were no longer trying to figure out how to dismiss Daniel's presence or brush him off as a fluke. They were starting to understand what Emily had seen in him. His words were more than just insights, they were a revelation. "I'm not saying I have all the answers," Daniel added, his voice steady now. "But I know that if we stop thinking about just the numbers, if we start thinking about the people we're affecting, then maybe we can turn this company around." Emily smiled, her eyes gleaming with something I hadn't seen in her before, a genuine excitement. A spark that made her seem even more powerful. "That's what I've been telling you all," she said, glancing around at the executives. "We've been so focused on the bottom line that we've lost touch with what really matters." There was a pause. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down, as if the weight of what had just been said hung in the air, suspended between us all. I looked around the room at the faces of my colleagues, people who had spent their careers fighting to stay ahead, to be the best, to prove their worth, and now, it seemed, they were seeing something they hadn't been able to see before, a path forward that didn't rely solely on financial gains, but on a deeper understanding of human connection. The silence was finally broken by Lawrence, the CFO. He cleared his throat, looking slightly disoriented. "This is unconventional," he said, his voice low, "but there's merit in what you're saying. Daniel, we've been so caught up in our own strategies that we've forgotten what drives the real value of a business." Emily nodded, her expression softening. "Exactly. We need to find a way to marry the numbers with the human element. If we can do that, we can rebuild this company into something more than just a profit machine. We can make it a company people actually care about." And in that moment, I realized something profound. Daniel, the janitor, had just taught all of us an invaluable lesson, not just about business, but about life. The best leaders, the ones who truly understand the world, aren't always the ones with the most impressive credentials or the most polished resumes. Sometimes, the people who see the most clearly are the ones who have the humility to listen, to observe, and to understand the people around them. And Daniel? He was no longer just the janitor. He was a genius, one who had found a way to make the human spirit the true currency of success. The weeks following that fateful meeting felt different, lighter. Somehow, there was a new sense of purpose in the office, an energy that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just because of the new strategy Emily had laid out, inspired by Daniel's insights. It was something deeper, something intangible. For the first time in years, the company felt alive again, its heart beating in a way that was more human than corporate. It all started to shift after that day. Daniel wasn't just a janitor anymore. He became a symbol of what we had all been missing, an embodiment of the wisdom that comes from truly understanding people. And that was when the real work began. Emily was the first to embrace the change. She had always been a sharp, calculating mind, but after that meeting, she seemed to transform. She stopped looking at the quarterly reports with such tunnel vision and began focusing on the stories behind the numbers. She spent more time with the employees, everyone from the managers to the interns, and asked questions that no one had thought to ask before. What was making them happy? What were their fears? What made them feel valued? And I could see it, too. I had spent years thinking that success in business was all about results, about hitting goals, meeting deadlines, and pushing through the noise. But now, I began to understand that success wasn't just about what you achieved. It was about how you made others feel along the way. The most remarkable part of this transformation was how quickly it spread. It wasn't just the upper management who felt this shift. Even the smallest interactions in the office seemed to carry more meaning. People started sharing stories about their lives, their challenges, their dreams. There was a new sense of camaraderie in the air, a unity that hadn't existed before. Everyone, from the marketing team to the IT department, felt like they had a voice, like they mattered. Of course, there were still obstacles. Daniel's presence at meetings, while initially welcomed, began to draw some skepticism from the board. It wasn't that anyone doubted his intelligence, it was more that they couldn't understand how someone like him, someone who had been invisible to them for so long, could possibly be instrumental in shaping the future of the company. And that's when Daniel made his next move. One afternoon, without warning, he invited a few of us to a small gathering in the break room. It was an odd place for a meeting, but there was a sort of charm to it. No polished boardroom tables or corporate branding. Just simple chairs and the hum of the coffee machine in the background. The kind of place where real conversations could happen. "Let's talk about the future," Daniel said, his voice steady but with an edge of excitement. Not just for the company, but for us as people. His words were unexpected. Most of us were there because we were curious. But I think deep down, we all knew that Daniel had something important to say. The room fell silent as he leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "I've been thinking about what makes a company great," he continued, "and it's not about profits. It's about how people treat each other. It's about the culture we create. That's what gets people excited. That's what gets them invested. It's not the product. It's the people behind it." He paused, letting his words sink in. I could see the others in the room shifting. Some nodding, others looking around at one another. It was as if the very foundation of what we had been working toward for so long was being questioned. And for a moment, we weren't sure if we should embrace the change or retreat back to what we knew. "We've got to make the workplace a place where people feel safe, heard, and valued. That's the only way this company will grow," Daniel said, his eyes scanning the room. "It's about leadership, yes, but it's about empathy. It's about walking a mile in someone else's shoes." I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened. The simplicity of his message was both humbling and profound. I had spent my life climbing the corporate ladder, doing whatever it took to get ahead. But Daniel was reminding us all of something essential, that we were all human. And at the end of the day, it was the connections between us that would ultimately determine our success. The conversation continued, and slowly, ideas began to flow. We brainstormed ways to better communicate with employees, to foster a culture of collaboration rather than competition. We talked about creating mentorship programs, open-door policies for communication, and incentives that weren't just about money but about personal growth and fulfillment. But even as the ideas flowed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the company. It was about life itself. What Daniel was talking about wasn't just business strategy, it was a way of living. It was a reminder that success, in any form, is not achieved in isolation. It's achieved through connection, understanding, and empathy. As the meeting came to a close, Daniel stood up and quietly made his way to the door. There was no fanfare, no applause. He didn't need any. His presence had already done the work. He had brought us something that was far more valuable than any business plan. He had brought us the truth. It was then that I realized something. Daniel wasn't just a janitor. He was the one who had seen through the veil, who had understood what we had all been blind to. And in a world so consumed by numbers and bottom lines, it was that very human insight that would change everything. As the weeks turned into months, the changes in the company became undeniable. The atmosphere had shifted, and the employees were thriving in a way I hadn't seen before. Daniel's influence continued to ripple through every corner of the office. From the boardroom to the break room, people felt heard, they felt valued, they felt like they belonged. And in return, the company began to flourish, not just in profits, but in spirit. What started as a small seed of an idea from a janitor, a man who had been overlooked for most of his life, transformed into a movement that redefined what success really meant. It wasn't about numbers or awards. It was about the people who made up the company, and the relationships they built with one another. As I looked around one afternoon, seeing the smile of an employee who had once been quiet and withdrawn, I realized that the true power of Daniel's message wasn't in his strategy. It was in his ability to remind us of what we had forgotten, that empathy, understanding, and connection were the foundations of any true success. And so, the company moved forward, stronger than ever, led by the very principles Daniel had shared. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for joining me on this journey. To continue following more life stories and lessons, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the next chapter in this series. Until next time.